Wrap-up Town Hall. We appreciate everyone's being here. My name is David Daslich. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC. I'd like to extend a special thanks on behalf of the Chamber and our CEO, John Reader Kleinmeyer, to UCCS and the Senator for Government the Individual for hosting us this evening. I'd also like to thank our elected officials in the room. We have our state electeds up front, but we also have some local electeds. Would you all stand for a moment to be recognized? We're joined this evening by Senator Tony Exum from District 11, the Vice Chair of Local Government and Housing Committee in the Senate, Senator Bob Gardner from District 12, the Assistant Minority Leader, Representative Regina English from District 17, Representative Don Wilson from District 20, and Representative Mark Snyder from District 18, Chair of the House Finance Committee. Over the 120 days of this last legislative session, we saw and discussed over 617 bills, and your chamber engaged on 65 of them, taking positions over a course of a long and sometimes laborious legislative session that encompassed 2 Sunday floor days in the House, something that I'm assured has not happened in the last 84 years, making this session very unique. We saw legislative themes from housing to business regulation, litigation, climate and energy, addressing our state's workforce, economic development, and wildfire response and mitigation. All of that and more I'm sure we'll be able to touch on tonight. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dunn from the Center for the Studies of Government and the Individual, Professor and Chair of the Political Science Department here at UCCS. Thank you, Dr. Dunn.
So, thank you all for being here. Before I ask our panelists some questions, say a little bit about CSGI. And also just want to let you know I will ask a few questions to start off, and I'm not certain what order you all can decide for yourselves. But then we'll turn it over to the audience for your questions. So the Center for the Study of Government and the Individual exists to study the constitutional, economic, and political foundations of free, flourishing, and prosperous societies. As part of that mission, we hold events such as this one, where we address contemporary issues, but we also hold events where we bring in speakers to address more historical and enduring questions, you would say, of our constitutional order. So I'm very grateful to the Chamber for co-sponsoring this with us. Also Alexandria Daslich, who is in the Center for the Study of Government and the Individual, for all of her work arranging this. So without further ado, I will start asking some questions. I'm going to exercise my moderator's prerogative and start off with some questions about higher education. We are, after all, at a public university. And so the first question I have for our panelists is, can you speak to some of the bipartisan efforts, or maybe not bipartisan, efforts to support higher education this session? So, again, I'm not certain how you all want to take this, but yes.
I'd be glad to take the first stab at that one. So I think we all recognize that the biggest problem with higher ed now is declining enrollment. And that has repercussions as far as the funding goes for higher ed. So I'm really proud that this year we were able to increase funding 5% total funds coming in, actually increased general fund contribution by 9%. It was a long negotiated compromise on how much tuition increase could be. I believe it settled at 5% in that regard. So I think the state recognizes some of the challenges higher ed is facing right now. A lot of our work has been towards developing a workforce and realizing that, you know, higher education may not be for everybody. And so I think that's one of the real thrusts of what we're trying to do is those two things combined. We are committed to keeping higher education as properly funded as we can, and I think that is a pretty big commitment on the state's part.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Seeing, you know, as Representative Snyder mentioned, higher education, the funding, one thing that we did a lot of work on this session was the workforce part of it, and I think that's going to play a key role as we get high school students transitioning into positions that they're already interested in, and giving them more of a direction in higher education of where they want to go. I think that'll start bringing back some of the enrollment, getting excited instead of going into higher education kind of blindly.
Anyone else? Yes.
Sure. The investment was about $45 million for individuals that are looking to expand beyond their high school education and getting certificates for work, because everybody's not going into higher ed, but they're looking to get into the workforce, apprenticeships and things like that. So it was a significant investment into that.
I think it's worth saying that you'll hear some things today that there's not broad bipartisan agreement on, or maybe not, but I think so. But on higher ed, particularly this year and all the years I've been in the General Assembly, I think there's been a broader and more solid agreement about funding higher ed. One of the challenges that we have, of course, is if we have a budget downturn, as higher ed knows very well, the first people to kind of take the hit are higher ed. So that's the time to be vigilant if you're in higher ed for what can happen. And it's just a matter of some very tough choices. It's higher ed versus Medicaid, higher ed versus K-12, and going down the list. So that's the important takeaway going forward, is to always be on top of the fact that as budget cuts have to happen, and that may be out there, higher ed may disproportionately bear the brunt, and it's hard to bring back. This is the first year I think we've really kind of brought it back.
I've long described higher education funding as the soft underbelly of state budgets. So if you have suggestions about how to make it less of that, you're welcome to many people at UCCS and other public institutions around the state. So you all already talked about my second question a little bit, but I'm interested in how you envision, maybe in more detail, the role of higher education in workforce preparation and development. What role do you see higher ed playing in Colorado, and how that might shift as well over time? Yes, Senator Gardner.
You know, one of the interesting tensions within the higher ed community itself is our standard research and four-year universities somewhat versus the community college system, and trying to figure out how to make that work to fund both. They are always stronger when they're together, and when they're split, it's kind of a meltdown. We, I think, have seen, again over a decade and a half, some shifting of emphasis from four-year universities to our community colleges, with the opportunity for community colleges in some cases to offer four-year degrees. I think there is this understanding that society is changing. We have some of the largest online global opportunities operating here in Colorado through CSU, and I think you're going to see more of that going forward, and that's all about tying university education, college education to workforce development and where it is, and about the cost as well.
Well, I'm particularly impressed with our efforts to get more high school students eligible for getting college credits, so that will, you know, one, reduce the cost and the length of time that they would be at a higher education institution. And I think that makes it more attractive to them also to get some of those credits out. We've always had IB programs, but I'm seeing this become more and more entrenched in schools all across the state, including rural schools. So I think that's a big thing moving forward as far as maintaining enrollment and keeping kids energized. And I think on the other school sides, they need to be more attuned to what are the positions that are going to be available 5, 10 years? Where is the economy going? Where's employment going? So I think all of those things together would be the future for higher ed.
Just to piggyback on what Senator Gardner was talking about, that one of the programs that the State College, or Pikes Peak State College, and some of the other community colleges offer now is a 4-year nursing degree that you can get at the State College, at State College prices. And that was very significant. I think that bill was, a few years ago, because of the national and state and local shortage on nursing. So that was one of the things that was very, very important.
Anyone else? Before I turn to a question, I'll ask everyone to address. So we'll start down here with Representative English. But the question I have then for all of you is, can you describe for us some of the legislative goals and expectations you had for this session, which started in January, and then perhaps how those shifted throughout the session? So.
Some of my legislative, well, let me just go to them. My 5 priorities, all of them went through except for one. And what I learned is that stakeholding is very important. However, because we were campaigning, we didn't have the opportunity, at least I'll speak for myself, I didn't have the opportunity to stakehold like I really wanted to really be more effective and thoughtful bringing forth legislation. But the legislation I was able to bring forth, it kind of happened abruptly, but it was pretty good legislation, and I'm proud of it, and it was tough, and I just learned to always be persistent and consistent. I don't know if you want us to go through some of it, but
Certainly, and actually, that was one of the questions about what you're most proud of from the session.
Okay. Yay. So I'm most proud of House Bill 231026, Family Time for Grandparents. That was a bill that was very near and dear to me based off personal lived experiences and just speaking with other grandparents across the state of Colorado. So this is one of the bills that I really had to fight for. I had to do a complete strike below and just talk with some different people, take some amendments, and being a new legislator, it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. Everything was happening to me so fast, but now I'm ready. I'm excited for January to bring some more robust legislation forward, but so Family Time for Grandparents, House Bill 231026 was very important to me. Another bill that was very important is House Bill 231191, which is prohibiting corporal punishment of children. This was a piece of legislation that was brought forward in 2017, and it didn't pass, but it passed this session, so I'm proud of that, especially being a director still on the Board of Education for Harrison School District 2. The health and well-being of our students and their mental health is very important, and we just don't believe clearly in the state of Colorado, because it's signed into law, that kids should be hit in school. They're there to get a successful and high-quality education, because that is what they deserve. So that was very important to me, so I'm glad that that got passed. And then I have House Bill 1223, Task Force to prioritize grant targets population. And what this bill will do is create a task force to identify those zip codes that are underserved and marginalized, but doing the work to prevent youth violence, teen suicide, and things like that. But we have to identify those places first so that we can make sure that the playing field is being leveled and that the grassroots organizations that are really thoughtfully doing the work and getting results can get some of those grant dollars, so we can just make sure that we are properly allocating funding. And that's 3. I can keep rolling, but
all right. Well, let's move through. I think
Yeah, it was, the session was chaotic, being a us being the two freshmen here, so it was a learning experience for us. Being former mayor, I went in with the idea I was going to focus on local government, infrastructure, water. I got put on local government, which was great. I got to work with some of those things, but ended up I'd say my best work was done on education. I had, which I wasn't planning anything for education. I was planning on working with people as far as what they were doing for education, but I didn't plan on sponsoring anything particular for education. Ended up, two of my favorite bills was Senate Bill 205, which Representative Snyder kind of mentioned, getting scholarships for students coming out of high school, going into trades, the construction industry, going to nursing, going into some of those high demand jobs. So that was great. And then another bill, Senate Bill 65, was kind of the prerequisite for that. That was reimbursing schools that help their students or get their students into college classes in those trades. So if you have a student that's taking an off-campus welding class, that school would get reimbursed for the cost of getting that student in that class and the transportation, all that. So those bills, very excited about, and I think they're going to do a lot for not only education, but our community in general, especially when it comes to the construction industry. We've been seeing a lot of struggles there as far as staffing and being able to get projects done. As far as local government, I got one bill passed, and now I forget the number of it, but it was a special districts bill that increased the amount that they had to go out to bid on. A lot of our special districts, especially in rural areas or even some of our local areas, when you go out to bid for water projects or the fire department has a certain project, sanitation, they can be small projects and you're still required to go bid. This upped that bar so they could take care of their small projects on their own without having to go through a bid process. And what we ran into in water was there's not a lot of people available to do the work. So water projects were going out to bid even though they knew there was only one contractor that could handle it, or one contractor that was going to bid on it. So I think that was a great bill for the local government, and then the two education bills. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. You know, I've thought about this question off and on all day. There's kind of two parts to it. How did you think the session was going to go, and how did it go, and then what are you most proud of? This was my 15th session, and next year will be my last, and that's good enough. I think I began every session kind of not knowing what's going to happen. You think you know. Every day at the Capitol begins with what you think's going to happen and what starts happening the moment you walk through the door. So in some ways I expected, because frankly Republicans are in the deep minority in both chambers, that it would be kind of a tough slog day in and day out, and that was the fact. What surprised me was, frankly, the things that we were able to do and the differences we were able to make, even from a pretty deep minority, but to be able to do so with some folks across the aisle that maybe were not in consonance with the furthest wing of the party. And so what am I most proud of? Well, that has to divide into two things as well. The things that I did and the things that I kept from happening. And the things that I did, I was able, with colleagues across the aisle, to make car theft a crime in Colorado again. Not that it ceased to be, but it is now a felony and surely a felony. I was able to pass a couple of behavioral health bills, again, to improve, particularly for youth behavioral health, access to services and the availability of those services. I, along with Representative Snyder, we passed a bill that didn't make a lot of news, but to extend the Office of Public Guardianship in Colorado to create guardianship services for those with disabilities or the elderly who have no family member whatsoever. In one way, it was a little bill, and on another way, at the very end of the session, we had to scrap to get the money and get it done. And so I'm kind of proud that we were able to get that money, and we had to play some games with how to fund it and how to move out there. I mean, legitimate stuff, but those kinds of things. I'm actually, and it would take an hour to explain it, I'm actually proudest of the procedural maneuvers I had to clean up a Uniform Commercial Code Amendment bill, which involved, because of late changes and late opposition, actually pulling the bill back, was again Representative Snyder's and my bill, pulling the bill back nearly from the governor's office to take a couple of late controversies out of the bill and move it through, and have some people walk up to me, colleagues, saying, I didn't know you could do that. Well, you know, take notes. The things that didn't happen. One was simply removing a section of a bill, House Bill 1192, which contained some antitrust pieces that the Attorney General wanted, but also an extension of the Colorado Consumer Protection Act in a way that estimates were that it might be $1 billion impact to the economy of Colorado. And we fought and fought and fought, and again, nothing was done by a single party. If it happened or it didn't happen, and things like that didn't happen without a fight. But that section was removed from the bill, and the fairly innocuous piece that was non-controversial passed. The same kind of things with respect to Senate Bill 213, the bill that would have usurped the power of local governments to do their land use planning. At the end of the day, and this was a team effort of all of Senate Republican caucus, along with a good handful of Democrat senators opposing that bill, it did not happen. And in answer to a later question, but we'll do more of it, Josh, it'll be back, so I'll stop. Representative.
Yes. Thank you. And I have to say that public guardianship bill that you sent over from the Senate was the best bill I saw all year. Didn't have to make a single change to that, and so that's a rarity. Usually Senate bills come over can be a little on the sloppy side.
And why do you send our stuff back that we have to fix? I don't know.
So this is my just completed my fifth session, so I guess I'm more of an elder statesman on this panel now, at least on the House side. And as usual, I have bills all over the place. I'm probably most proud of my continued efforts to work on wildfire prevention, wildfire resiliency. I was part of 3 bills that got passed this year. One with Senator Exum on looking at the possibility of using modeling and evacuation times as a tool. Also, a grant program that we're hoping a lot of federal funds will pour into this grant program for hardening homes and developing best practices for new builds, rebuilds, and also some retrofitting of existing homes. And then also developing a workforce in that area. We've learned that our workforce is really up there. I think the average age is 60 years old now. So we're trying to build that buzz up with young people. Like, hey, there's a real profession. You can be out working in the Colorado clean air and doing lots of great stuff there. I think I ended up with maybe 18 bills. That number always surprises me because we start with 5. But one I'm really proud of was 271. It's kind of, we have a problem with, cannabis has been legal now 10 years in Colorado. We're starting to see where people are taking hemp and using chemicals and other processes to create an intoxicating product, totally unregulated, sold in gas stations, head shops, convenience stores with these Delta 8, Delta 10, these new, really dangerous, scary, unstudied, unregulated stuff. So that bill came and we were able to get that pass. It hasn't been signed by the governor yet. I know he's taking his time. It's a really tough space there. I had a bill 280, which came from the commercial haulers and the oil and gas industry, putting a fee upon themselves to fund things like additional funding for PFAS, which I know is something Senator Exum's worked tirelessly on. A lot of money for areas like I-70 where we've had all those washouts, and really a lot of great stuff in that bill. But one part that got cut out by some of my more progressive colleagues, I guess, we would have programmed to replace our aging fleet of commercial diesel trucks. The oldest 25% of those trucks give 75% of the emissions emitted on our highways. And this bill would have incentivized them with a tax credit to replace those trucks with renewable natural gas. But some of my colleagues think that even renewable natural gas is the wrong way to go. They want to go straight to hydrogen. We're not there yet with hydrogen. Seems like my entire adult life, it's 5 years away. 5 more years and hydrogen's going to revolutionize the way we power things. And so I worry that sometimes they get a little ahead of themselves and they eschew the good in pursuit of the perfect, which I think happens. Basically, I like to look at it from a business community standpoint. So whether it's the cannabis industry or the home builders or whomever, we have a lot of bills that come forward, but I want to make sure that we get those folks contacted early, bring them on board, and see what we can do together, because that's the way you make lasting change. And then I just had a whole plethora of other bills, from court data sharing to, and I had a few that didn't quite make it to the finish line also. I had one bill that 109, which would have made sure that they could prosecute people for drug distribution resulting in death. And we created a problem with our fentanyl bill last year. It created 2 different standards. And so we're just trying to reconcile that, but I'm afraid it didn't make it. So sometimes you think about the ones that didn't make it through as much as you do the others. And I only had one bill vetoed by Governor Polis this year, so I feel pretty good about that.
Senator Exum.
Thank you very much. This is my 9th year in the legislature. I've spent 8 years in the House, and this is my first year in the Senate. It was a little bit more of adjustment than I thought it would be. A little smaller chamber, a few different personalities to learn about and deal with. But overall, I had a pretty successful session. One of the first bills that I was able to do probably would have been my pre-file bill had I met the young lady that was impacted by this. But it was, and I had a lot of help from Senator Gardner on this bill, Senate Bill 75, deletion of a child's name from criminal justice records. Some of you may not remember, but the reason behind the bill is to protect minors, especially if they are witnesses in a criminal justice case. To protect them, protect their identity. We had a case here last summer where a young lady was murdered in a Walgreens store by a coworker. She was stabbed 42 times. And the next day, her name was blasted across the news. So the mom came to me and she wanted a pause with a 5-day, maybe a 10-day pause. And we went one step better in deleting the names of minor victims and witnesses, because I found out that it seemed like the perpetrators had more rights than witnesses did. And so, and with the help of Senator Gardner, we put an amendment on there to codify minors' rights in that process. So that was one of the bills. And then another one that's it's going to be signed Monday by the governor. And it turned out to be very, very controversial. I guess I wasn't really surprised about it, but it was regarding relative and kin placement of a child. And basically what the bill did, it extended the time from 3 months to 12 months before a foster parent can intervene. And the whole idea behind it was to give parents or next of kin an opportunity, if they wish to, and if they pass, a strong background check, because the biggest concern is about the safety and welfare of that child. And so that bill got passed, and it's going to be signed into law on Monday. And another bill that was controversial with the governor's office. I never had a threat of a veto, but so it was kind of interesting to work with the governor's office on that. But it was a consumer report not including medical debt information, and basically it doesn't say that your medical debt will go away, but it would be included on your credit report for a couple of reasons. One, it impacts people's lives in a real big way, and it's really not indicative of a person's credit worthiness, because some people have unexpected medical debt that they still have to deal with. So we work with the governor's office, and there's I think we agreed to like a 5-year sunset or review, and see how this is working moving forward. Another bill that some of you may be familiar with, and I'll end it there, is Proposition 123, affordable housing programs. It's basically honoring the wishes of the voters and allowing some funding to go toward affordable housing before it's impacted by TABOR. It's a very innovative way of getting some more money into affordable housing, and the bill just puts some guardrails around how to accomplish the wishes of voters.
All right, well, thank all of you. I think that I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the audience, because I have more questions, so if you all don't have help, you can fire away. But I suspect there are plenty of questions in the audience, some which would probably be similar to the ones that I have. So if you do have a question, please just go ahead and raise your hand, tell us who you are, and I will enforce the ask a question, don't make a speech rule. So,
Well, hopefully you'll enforce answer the question, don't make a speech rule.
well, you're elected officials, I'm in power here.
We're the worst.
So, yes.
So, there was a Colorado recreational use statute that was put forward, and basically our outdoors are being loved to death. And this statute was going to protect private landowners who wanted to allow the public to use their land. And it's particularly important to our community, because if we ever do get ready to keep going, we're going to need stuff like this to make it happen. And also, our Colorado Springs utilities would be a part of this protection. So all the land that they use too. But evidently the trial lawyers decided they didn't want it. And I guess Polis pulled out and said he wouldn't support it. How do you get public will to get something like that to go forward? Using that as a kind of an example. What does it take to kind of, it's a good act. Who doesn't want to have access to someone's, if the landowner says, yeah, you can go on my land, but now he's worried that you're going to step on a nail and sue him, right? So, how do you get those kind of things? What do you recommend, or what do you know of that bill, and why it didn't happen?
I may be best positioned to answer the question. I spent till 11 o'clock or something defending and trying to get that bill passed out of Senate Judiciary. The bill arises out of a 10th Circuit case that occurred at the Air Force Academy of all places. And I guess trying to do it in 15 words or less, of what it does is it exposes landowners who may allow public access across their property to get to public lands, exposes them to greater liability or greater potential for liability than was thought to exist before the case. The bill was to kind of take us back to the understanding that everybody had and create a safe haven for landowners. And as you say, it's a big deal. The folks who testified in favor of the bill were outdoor recreation folks, county commissioners, and local government officials of all sorts from recreational counties, if you will. The folks who testified against it were folks associated with trial lawyers, because we were going to put a fence around liability. Your practical question, Dave, what to do about it? I think start now, and I think start talking to your legislators. Find the key legislators on those committees, we can talk about that, that really need to be leaned on, that this is the right thing to do. By the way, I'm going to tell you something about the bill. I think the bill is more important for what message it sends to everyone than what it practically does. And by that I mean that the shift in liability is maybe not going to be that great, because they're very fact-based cases and all sorts of things. But what it has signaled to landowners is, and to their insurers more importantly, is don't do this. Put up a fence, block it off, don't let people come through. And you know, that was part of the debate as well, was the other guys saying, well, I don't know, this is not going to change the law that much. And my answer to that was, it's going to change the perception of that risk by those who are granting free access in such a way that they will cut it off. And I think we've probably already seen that. But.
You know, Dave, there are some things you can do on a local level. I know there's two former mayors of Manitou Springs in the House, with Dan Stewart over there, and we've had an arrangement with Cave of the Winds, where once a year you go up, you sign a release and a waiver, and then you're able to access Williams Canyon and go across their property, and they have full confidence that if something happens, they're not going to be liable unless they did something egregious or something like that. So I know I didn't really get to hear that bill up at the State House, but there are some things you can do on a more localized level to accomplish what you're talking about. At least we were able to do that with Cave of the Winds and Williams Canyon.
Yes.
Speaking of trial attorneys, we know we have a housing issue in our state, and we know that we're trying to do lots of things with Prop 123 and others, but until we do something with construction defect law in the state, we're not seeing a variety of housing. We're seeing apartments now, and we're seeing single-family homes. But the importance for townhomes and those that can be an entry-level home of our young people moving to our state, what is it going to take for us to get construction defect law fixed?
Now's my question.
I'll try to tackle that. I've been asked that for the same number of years I've been in the legislature, and I've given the same answer. One is that we came up with a compromise. I thought a good compromise. It was a bipartisan bill back in 2017 that didn't seem to fit the need. The second thing is, I made a call today to the planning person with the city, Steve Polson, and I said, can you give me an example where the supposedly construction defects have kept or has happened in a community, a condominium community, to where I said, I need some evidence. I haven't seen construction slow down because of construction defects. I've seen construction slow down because of the cost, because of trying to find a place to build. But my biggest concern is, like I said, if that has really happened, if somebody's has built a condominium or a townhome project, and lawyers or whoever are putting together a group to come up with these false accusations or to bring litigation, I told them, I said, I'd like to hear about that or see that, especially in my district, because I'll deal with that. I spent almost 36 years on the fire department. 3 of those years I spent in fire prevention. And my job in fire prevention was to review plans on buildings, review plans on fire extinguishing systems. And so I got to build a relationship kind of the hard way with contractors and developers. And I think one of the biggest issues that we have in our community, I don't know about other communities, but when you build something and you build it according to code, frivolous lawsuits are not going to stand. But if you build something, I don't care how big the project is, and you try to cut lines, because there's exceptions to the code, and if you build things where you're always kind of, I don't really have to do that portion. I can use the exception to the rule, then I think some things are going to happen. But I have not seen that. If somebody can give me projects or places to where this has had an impact on slowing of the economy, but when I look around the city, there's building everywhere. And they're building townhomes, they're building apartments.
Not townhomes, $1 million townhomes, but that doesn't help our average worker.
So if you can get me...
Senator, we'll get you some.
Okay.
We'll get you some examples. Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you.
So, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm a freshman in the House, so I don't know all the history. But I do think it's obvious that we haven't had a condo built in the state of Colorado. So, no, you haven't seen any lawsuits about it because there hasn't been one built. And when we're talking about teacher housing, we're talking about fire and public works employees, starter homes, when they want to come to a community, and we don't have that housing. We had this big push that I think a lot of it was, we had this big push for housing. A lot of it, I think, worked against housing. We need to hash this out and get it to where people they don't have to go and buy a 200 or 2,000 square foot house. They can buy a 700 square foot apartment to start. And the thing with construction defect is, why are we getting apartments built all over? Well, because it doesn't apply to them. It doesn't apply the same. So that's something I plan on trying to work on. I don't know if there's the appetite for it at the legislator, but I would love to work more on that also.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Senator Gardner and then Representative.
So, as I've already told you, it's my 15th session in the legislature. It's an issue that I have fought for 15 sessions. In 2007, one of the very first issues in House Judiciary that kept me there for hours and hours was amendments to the Construction Defects Act, which had been pretty good prior to that, and pretty balanced. Every year since has been either something that has made it more expensive to build by higher insurance costs. It has encouraged people who have investment money and building money, development money, to put it elsewhere. to avoid the risk. And you ask a very straightforward question. I'll give you a very straightforward, and you and I had a conversation. You said, would I behave myself? So it's an answer to your question. It's going to take at least 2 election cycles and a change, maybe not a complete party change, but a change in those who are serving and their understanding of what makes housing affordable and how the economy actually works and what it costs to build and what the risks are. But we will keep fighting this. I've got one more session to fight it. I will tell you that Senate Republicans pushed this issue as part of the, well, what would it take for you to be supportive of some version of 213? And one of the answers was your commitment to do something about construction defects and reform of the construction defects law in Colorado. And I will tell you that that fell on deaf ears and was rejected out of hand. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I felt fortunate because my first session was 2019, so I avoided the 2017 grand compromise that really satisfied nobody in 2017. But I mean, last I checked, something like 5% or less of new construction is actually going into the condominium communal ownership type of model, and that is one of the greatest ways people have is to get into the real estate market. Just have that first starter condo and work your way up. And to not have that in this time of severe housing shortage is just not acceptable, I don't think. So I'd be willing to really look, roll up our sleeves and really look at what we can do. I mean, I recognize, being an attorney myself, trial lawyers got to eat too, but they're a little over the top for this one. And, I think there's definitely room for improvement, and I'd be willing to commit to finding a solution, because that's a big part of the housing market that we're neglecting, and it could be a critical part of getting us out of this housing shortage we're experiencing now.
You're on. You're on. That's good.
All right. Other questions? Yes.
Could you explain why you don't agree? It looked like you didn't agree with what he said.
I just don't, I don't see it. I mean, there's construction going on everywhere. If you can show me a case or projects why that's not being built, I'd like to see it. I can always change my mind.
Thank you.
Yes. Or
Just to quickly tag on to Senator Gardner's point about 2 election cycles. If young people understood in Colorado that the money they are spending on rent to an apartment, which is outrageous, that same amount of money could be building equity in a townhome or condo. And that same generation feels like the American dream is, they can't reach it for various reasons, and housing is one. But something as esoteric as construction defects, which they think has no relationship to what they're experiencing in life, actually is a really big deal for them to be able to build wealth and economic security in that starter home. And so perhaps if there was a greater understanding of that in those 2 election cycles, maybe that could be shortened. I don't think there's an understanding by the generation that is most severely impacted by this. They're missing a whole opportunity, 5 to 10 to 15 years to be building wealth, purchasing a home instead of an apartment.
is there a question? I just want.
Do your business.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
So I just want, you did mention, the gentleman on the end, he mentioned that there were some innovative ways that we were looking at bringing down costs. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, what are the innovative ways other than what's already been discussed?
Who's it directed to?
The gentleman at the right, on the far right.
Senator Axel.
Senator Axel. Senator Axel.
you're talking about.
I thought you had mentioned that there were some innovative ways that Colorado was looking at bringing housing down.
I said,
Just building.
no, I mentioned about Prop 123 was the innovative way about getting funding for affordable housing.
I'll give you one way, and I can't fault our local government, but I did a tour with a legislative group in Denver, and a developer was showing us one of his developments in Denver, and I asked the question, well, what's the largest single challenge and cost driver that you have in doing this? And I had to say, I'm Senator Gardner from Colorado Springs, and his response was, well, Colorado Springs is the example, because what my largest cost and uncertainty is the regulatory cost and the time that it takes to get approvals, to get a development approved, the money we have to invest in doing that, the building code, so on and so forth, and that municipalities can do better, and we do better in this immediate region than other places in the states. But that's something that in its own way doesn't cost money. We don't have to put money in the budget to do it unless it's for expediting the approvals and making sure that's done. So that's one. The other is to simply recognize that things like rent control don't improve the supply of housing. They sound good. Making it more difficult for people to invest in rental housing doesn't make rents more affordable at all. So that's not innovative, that's age-old.
Right.
If I got the gist of your question, the state and all the local governments combined don't have enough money to get us out of the housing crisis. You know, we can rely on the private sector, who I think does a great job of developing housing. But what we can do is be very strategic. So I had a bill a couple of years ago, I called it the Middle Income Access Housing Program. And I learned a lot through that program. So where the state can really step in and to make a project go forward that can result in, affordable housing. Where the developer agrees, yeah, he'll keep the costs down for the buyers or the renters coming in, but the state can be on the front end, whether that's helping with the acquisition of land costs or other ways that we can do. So if we're really strategic with the money we have, we can make projects happen. And I think that's the future to getting out of our housing crisis now. Is public-private partnership models where strategic investments from the state can result in a good affordable housing stock.
All right, I have a question.
Yes. As Senator Gardner said, Senate Bill 213 is most likely coming back. But my question is, for all of them, did you support 213 as it was presented, and why or why not? As Representative English, we'll start with you.
I did reluctantly support 213. We can always do more thoughtful and better work. I felt like it was really abrupt, and it came, towards the end. And just hearing from my constituents who put me in the seat, I was listening to my constituents. And so I voted yes on the bill because in my district, affordable housing is very, very important with the makeup of my particular district. But I knew that this bill needed some more thought and some more work done with it. So hopefully, if and when it does come back, we can be more thoughtful around the decisions that we're making, because it definitely will impact the entire state of Colorado.
I was opposed to 213. Again, coming from being a former mayor, I think local control is very important. Our communities do a lot of work for their planning and their comprehensive plans and how they're going to grow and how they're going to afford that. And when you neglect, when you put in densities that do not work with the infrastructure provided or any of those systems, especially when we're talking about water now, it doesn't work. It makes problems worse. And people live in the areas they live in for certain reasons. You don't move out of downtown to move into an area that is soon to become a new downtown. You move where you want to live for the certain attributes that community has. The other thing is, I don't think 213 had anything to do with affordable housing. It had to do with property, density control, those kind of things that doesn't make anything more affordable. If anything, it does maybe allow for some more housing on the market to make housing itself more competitive, but it doesn't create affordable housing.
I oppose it in all of its forms. A quick story. I had an opportunity about a month into the session to speak to a panel of Colorado Municipal League. And I was there with a colleague, and the House members weren't there because y'all were still stuck on the floor. So I don't know what was going on over there. But a council member from Vail stood up and didn't really understand where the panel members were on what was to become 213, and just really laid out very passionately what a terrible idea it was. And I looked at her and I said, Counselor, I suspect, I'm from Colorado Springs and you're from Vail, and I suspect we don't agree on very much, but I bet we agree that our communities know best what is going to work for our communities for land use and development and future growth. It was as close to standing ovation as one has. That's how strong the opposition was to 213. What was amazing to me about that was that in the face of near universal opposition of all elected officials in the state, the governor and his bill sponsors chose to go forward with something brought late in the session that people finally saw. We were off the floor of the Senate second to the last day for 6 hours. It was pretty good for me. I wish I'd have known we were going to be long. I could have run errands. All of that was about people running back and forth between the governor's office and the Senate trying to figure out a solution to 213. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't get the 6 people, at least 6 people in the Senate Democrat caucus who had been former local elected officials, that this was a good idea. Were there some good ideas in 213? I think there probably were. Could it have been subject to a statewide conversation? There was one proposal to do that by Senator Kirkmeyer, but that just didn't get traction. So it's a conversation we've got to have. I hope we'll have the conversation. I hope everybody will get to say, that works in Colorado Springs, it doesn't work in Manitou. It works in Monument, it doesn't work in Colorado Springs. And what Vail looks like is not what we're going to look like, and how does that work out? Sorry for the speech. Go ahead.
I wonder if that Vail councilor, were they opposed before or after Dylan Roberts exempted mountain communities?
Well, and by the way, Representative, one of the things I really dislike in these things is when groups come in, and in a way I don't blame them, but they come in and go, well, it doesn't work for us. Will you take us out? And they gradually strip out and leave counties behind or somebody. And yeah, I mean, it's point's well taken. That was a gambit to try to get support.
So, Brandy, to answer your question, the introduced bill I had real problems with and couldn't get around to supporting. The one that came over from the Senate, turning it into a housing needs assessment, I was happy with that. And then our Transportation, Housing, and Local Government Committee stuffed a lot of stuff back in there, and I never had a chance to vote on that bill, but I was not about making DOLA become the supreme commander of how decisions are made at the expense of, we have a strong local government history. We're a home rule state, and that stuff's important, and I think it needed, personally, I think Governor Polis kind of took his foot off the gas after getting reelected, and this year I did not see the leadership from the governor's office I've been accustomed to.
Yeah, I didn't support the bill in the original form. I did support the Senate amendments that we put on there. I did support Senator Kirkmeyer's amendment about the summit. And the House screwed it up. So it was a very complicated bill. I heard from all you local folks. I heard from the mayor. I understood that. And the bill sponsor heard too, and that's why several changes were made regarding reestablishing more local control about planning, about design, about timing, a lot of things. And we sent a good version of it to the House, and it's unfortunate that it did not get done. But I understand I wouldn't have been able to support what they sent back to us.
So I'll exercise moderator's prerogative. I think we're really out of time now, but I have one more question for the panelists. Following on this, besides 213, what issues from this past session do you see reemerging in the next session or even future sessions? And so if we could be relatively quick with this, just go down the line. What do you envision in for the future of the Colorado legislature?
I think all the big bills that didn't make it this year are coming back.
Okay. Is there one in particular that you're going to say you're really looking out for?
213, just cause eviction,
All right.
which had some good stuff. Like so many bills, there's good stuff in there, but a lot of the newbies, the new first years, haven't realized yet that you get 80% of what you want in the bill, that's a victory. But they want that 100%. And if you're going to make that decision, you'll probably end up, dying in committee or vetoed by the governor or what have you. So I would expect all those to come back. I think that the real success of this session was a lot of the big bills that didn't make it, to be honest with you. We had two competing Metro District bills, the correct one won this time. But, with such a big majority for Democrats in the House, a supermajority, in fact, a close to supermajority in the Senate, I think we're going to have the same problem I've seen before when you have with a Republican Democrat. You come from a safe district, you don't have the motivation to be collaborative, to make changes, because you don't have to worry about getting reelected. And I think now the chambers are kind of in that position, and I don't think it's for the betterment of Colorado that that situation exists.
All right. Others?
Well, I would just say, I would agree with Mark, Representative Snyder, that the majority of those big bills that didn't go through, they're gonna come back. But I personally think that the banning of assault rifles, I'm not the bill sponsor, but I believe that banning of assault rifles are going to come back, because that was a huge deal, and it didn't make it. So I think just giving more thought to that, because we heard from a lot of people, mainly students. So I think that's one of the big issues that'll probably come back.
I would say yes, that's probably going to come back, or similar bills when it comes to firearms. I also think rent control is going to come back, or eviction, just evictions, those kind of things. I'm hoping, as far as real estate and landlords, that maybe it does settle down a little, but I think those items will come back.
I think we're going to see all of those things. And on the criminal justice side, we're going to see something on distribution of drugs causing death come back. I don't know if it'll suffer the same fate or not, but that was back. We'll see, we didn't talk today about a safe injection sites bill, which Republicans have managed to band together with some folks on the other side of the aisle that that's not a good way to go. But it's an idea that keeps coming back. I've seen it for 3 or 4 years now. Affordable housing as an issue will come back. And then let me say something that I've been remiss in not saying. It's something I'm really proud of, but it's a years-long effort. and former Representative Carver worked on it probably harder than anyone, was our reform of the judicial process of the Commission on Judicial Discipline this year. Will go to the ballot, not this year, but next. Changing that in a way that gives people greater say in the judicial discipline process rather than just the judges themselves. And I think you'll see judicial bills of various sorts. I'm thinking about a couple myself to do revisions, and they don't, I guess as long as David McGoya writes for the Gazette, they will get print, but they're not bills that necessarily stir the public ire and rancor, but they're very important bills for how we do justice in this state.
Senator Exelman, did you have any predictions about what we'll be talking about this time next year?
No, just, I would agree that most of the big bills that ran into issues, they'll be back, and particularly 213, and I hope it's in a better form. There's time to work on it. I mentioned that to the sponsor when it was introduced. I said we need to include local input. I said it's not gonna. It's another tool in the toolbox to help create more affordable housing, but it needed a lot more work. And I agree, it was rushed. And because I sat on that committee, that 12-hour committee, hearing people's concern, and so did the bill sponsor, and that's why a lot of changes were made. So, but there'll be a few back that may end up the same fate, but hopefully there's a little bit more time in this interim time to make those bills, or put those bills in a better position.
All right, well, I want to personally thank all of you for your service to our state and for taking time out of your day to be here with us this afternoon. It's been very helpful, I think, for all of us here.
I think it's great we finished on a time for everybody to get home and watch the Nuggets game.